Now, based on the popularity of my recent wildcard video, it certainly looks like Game Week 4 is going to be a popular time for managers to use the wildcard button. And to help you out, I've got not one, not two, not even three, but 4 wildcard drafts to take you through. The first thing I wanted to talk about in this video, because I'm not going to go position by position in each draft because we'll be here for ages. I just wanted to go through the players that for me are pretty much locked in to be in each of the drafts. In defence, I really like Andy Robertson of Liverpool. He's a whole million cheaper than Trent. Looks to be, you know, there or thereabouts. Certainly last season at least, there or thereabouts in terms of Trent's underlying numbers in terms of attacking data. In fact, Robertson actually outperformed Trent last season for underlying XG and XA. Just something to bear in mind. Rico Lewis looks absolutely awesome for Man City at the moment. Pep has been singing his praises in the press. I think, yes, Kyle Walker is obviously going to come into the team at some point. But I do think with the way that he's been performing, Rico Lewis's place in this Man City team is his to lose at the moment. The one sort of inherent risk that comes with it, I guess, is the fact that it's the international break. Walker has not been selected for England and Lewis has. So, you know, Walker's going to get a rest for a couple of weeks working with Pep on, you know, in his break, regaining full like playing fitness, and he could well start Game Week 4. There is, of course, a little bit of a risk to go with Lewis, but when he and Guardiola were playing in the same team, you would previously have thought Guardiola to be that super attacking inverted Pep fullback, which we saw last season, but it hasn't been that. It's been Rico Lewis, and at times, particularly when they've been going forward, and I noticed it in the West Ham game, Rico Lewis has been literally playing up front alongside Erling Haaland. So he looks like a really good option. And if he plays, he's a steal at 4.6 million. And I genuinely think, even if he doesn't play all the games, a starting, you know, reasonably regularly starting Man City defender at 4.6 million is going to be a really good option. And I also really like Lewis Dunk as well. I think of all of the centre-backs in the league, he offers some of the most goal threat that pretty much all the centre-backs can carry. And he just plays every game he's fit for Brighton. And the next couple of fixtures, Ipswich and Nottingham Forest, are really, really good. I think he's a really decent option. And on the contrary, I guess, to Rico Lewis, who I'll admit is a little bit of a minute's risk, Lewis Dunk, as long as he's fit, is going to play every game for Brighton. In the midfield, I've gone for kind of the 4, I would say, sort of the best emerging midfielders in the game so far. Mo Salah, he's in all of these drafts. I don't really need to say any more about him. I think Salah and Haaland are kind of essential going forwards, particularly if you're playing your wildcard, just with how well they've done so far. Eze and Mbumo, they both tick all the kind of boxes. The talisman for their respective teams on penalties, free kicks, playing 90 minutes every game. You know, both of, I would say, their team's competition talisman. I don't really know how to say it. Tony and Elise have both left, leaving these two guys to be the real 2 stars of their team. And particularly, you know, Crystal Palace's fixtures coming up look really good. Rodgers of Aston Villa, I don't rate him massively. I do think that he'll do well this season, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's going to be all that prolific. I don't think he's going to get like double-digit goals, double-digit assists, quite anything like that. But I do think he's still really good value at 5.1 million. You wouldn't be afraid to chuck him in your team for any game week, basically. And you'll see he can be used as a rotation option in most of these drafts. I really like him as an option in that regard. And then spoken about Salah and Haaland being needed. Of course, Erling Haaland is there as well. All right, so getting into the first draft then, I have got Martinez, Robertson, Lewis, and Anthony Robinson starting in defence. You see Lewis Hall there, it should actually be Lewis Dunk. Mo Salah, Eze, Semenyo, Rodgers, Haaland, Isak, and João Pedro. And Mbumo on the bench as well. I've gone for Mosquera and Fabianski as the 2 kind of 4 million goalkeeper and defender combo. I really like this draft. I think it might not be quite as high in terms of expected points as some of the other drafts you're going to see here, but I think it's probably like the safest of them all, particularly if you go for Lewis Dunk instead of Lewis Hall. You pretty much guarantee that you've got a full starting defence, a midfield that's probably going to play every game, and a nice bit of bench rotation there. For Game Week 4 in this particular scenario, because he has Man City away, I've elected to bench Mbumo. You could play him over Rodgers or João Pedro if you wanted to, but I think with Rodgers having Everton and João Pedro having Ipswich, those 2 fixtures are just so much better than what Mbumo has got. So that was my reasoning basically behind the benching there. But what it does mean is every week, unfortunately, you do have a little bit of a benching headache, but it does mean that you don't necessarily have to use transfers if some of these players get injured, because you've always got a good option. Well, I mean, 2 options with a 4.5 million defender on the bench. I think this team is really nice and balanced. You can see there 62.4 expected points. I think actually it's not double accounted for Haaland's points, so it should be in and around 70 and gets a 93% AI rating according to Fantasy Football Hub. If you want to sign up to Fantasy Football Hub, all of these wildcard drafts are done in the Fantasy Football Hub team drafting tool. You can sign up to Fantasy Football Hub. I've got a 50% off link in the description. Anything else to talk about in this team? Probably Martinez in goal. With the spare cash that I did have, I elected to spend it on going for Martinez in goal. Looking at the fixtures that Aston Villa have coming up, I think they've got a good chance of keeping a clean sheet, to be honest, in all 3 of those games, particularly considering Everton and Wolves are at home at Villa Park. And also, if they don't keep clean sheets, I do feel like Martinez could be good for saves as well. And I say this in quite a few of my videos, but my kind of favourite goalkeepers in FPL are ones that keep kind of an average amount of clean sheets, which you'd probably expect Aston Villa to do, but they consistently get saves bonus. That's what really separates the good goalkeepers in the game from the great, and I really like Martinez for that kind of opportunity for clean sheets and saves. Semenyo, most of these teams you'll see there's kind of a 5.5 million midfielder in there. Right now I think Semenyo is emerging as the best option in this price category. The only kind of issue I would guess is he's got Liverpool Anfield in game week 5. However, you could just go from Boomer with a nice sort of bench rotation. You got that kind of works quite well, to be honest. Or you could, play him instead of Rodgers if you fancied. So you've got quite a lot of room here for rotation depending on the fixtures. And I think all of the kind of, well, not all the big hitters, but all the top scoring names that you've seen in the game so far. With this next draft, I've actually managed to squeeze in Salah, Cole Palmer and Haaland all into the same draft, and I actually think it's still fairly nicely balanced and decent. There's 2 options there on the bench that play. You do unfortunately have to go with a 4.5 million striker if you want to do this, and right now there are no 4.5 million strikers that are going to play. Couple of weaknesses I would say this team has is just a little bit less on the bench. You've got Konsa, who can always come in, but with Villa playing in the Champions League, there's always a bit of a risk, I guess, that he doesn't start. And also, just having one player that's, you really want to rely on your bench is a little bit risky. And you do have Rodgers and João Pedro in there, who you're kind of counting on starting every week, which I think Rodgers probably does. But João Pedro, just with the sheer amount of attacking options that Brighton have, it does probably create a little bit of risk. You might just have enough cash in your FPL bank. I've built this team with a 100 million budget, but you might have just enough cash instead of João Pedro to go for Wissa. And I would say Wissa of Brentford is probably just a little bit more of a safer option. In terms of the next couple, maybe 2 or 3 fixtures, his points might not be quite as high, but across the season, you've got to say Wissa's probably going to be more nailed. So yeah, this team's largely the same as the one you've just seen, but I've dropped to Dean Henderson in goal, replaced a striker with Cole Palmer, gone for João Pedro and Haaland up top. Konsa, Greaves, who I would say looks pretty much nailed on for Ipswich now, and there don't seem to be all that many decent 4 million defenders. So I think Greaves right now is probably my favourite. I'm not going to hang my hat on him being my favourite, but he's the one I picked. Fabianski, I didn't speak about him in the last draft, but he is, who I think will start as a goalkeeper at 4 million at the moment with Areola being injured. Areola he's not injury prone, but I would say of a lot of goalkeepers, most goalkeepers in the Premier League, right, he gets injured more than most, I would say. So yeah, I think Fabianski is probably the best 4 million keeper just to have a chance of starting. And the rest of the team, to be honest, is fairly similar to the one that you've just seen. But I think with having to upgrade to Cole Palmer, it just leaves you with a little bit less sort of flexibility and options on the bench. So, for example, in comparison to the last team, you have to start in Mbumo against Man City away. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, and you're kind of relying on João Pedro and Rodgers to be in your team every week. This team, 71.5 expected points for game week 4, so slightly better than the team you've just seen, with a 95% AI rating. All right, then this next draft is, a little bit different to the one that you've just seen, and I would suggest it depends whether there's 2 differences basically. Instead of João Pedro, I've gone for Isak, who I do think across the season is going to be better. He's going to be more nailed on in that Newcastle team just because I think he's probably their best striker they've got available, and he gets better minutes in my mind than João Pedro. And I've gone for Diogo Jota of Liverpool as well, who, the question you would have to ask yourself is, does Jota and Isak outscore João Pedro and Palmer? That's kind of the question you've got to ask yourself. This team gets 0.2 more expected points for game week 4. And yeah, it's just really whether you think Palmer and João Pedro of the last draft. Oh, that's not the right one. Whether you think this one, Palmer and João Pedro of this draft is better basically than Jota and Isak of this one. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I gotta say, whichever one of these drafts you pick, they both look pretty tasty, don't they? I mean, getting Cole Palmer, Salah and Haaland all in the same team is pretty good. Like I said, unfortunately, you've got to rely on João Pedro and Rodgers. This one, a little bit more, well, I guess you'd be more happy to rely on Isak week on week because you'd expect him to start and have a chance of scoring against pretty much anyone. And Diogo Jota, you don't necessarily need to go for him, but outside of Mbeumo and Eze around that sort of 7 to 7.5 million midfielder price category, I think Jota's probably the next best. But again, there are obviously other options at this price tag. So yeah, let me know what you think of this draft in the comments. This next team is, to be honest, a little bit of a mixture of all the teams that you've just seen. And right now, I know I made a video earlier on in the week about a wildcard draft, but right now I think this is probably the favourite wildcard draft team that I've put together. I think it has a little bit of everything. It's got kind of rotation in every position, 3 playing players every week on the bench, and all the key players I think you need to be picking in your team. Unfortunately, there's just no way to squeeze the likes of Saka and Palmer in on top of the players that you've got here. But yeah, the standard back 4 with Martinez, who I think is a little bit better than Henderson. You're kind of getting what you pay for with each keeper. I don't think there'll be a whole lot to separate them, but I do think the expected points for Martinez in both my brain and the, as you can see there, the Fantasy Football Hub AI algorithm are better for Martinez, but he is of course more expensive. Salah, Eze, Semenyo and Rodgers in midfield alongside Mbeumo, who's on the bench. I mean, it's kind of up to you really whether you want to start Mbeumo in there over Rodgers maybe, but I would probably bench him considering those expected points. Haaland, João Pedro, and I really like, when you're on a wild card, it obviously separates you from other players in the game just being on your wild card and being able to use it right. And I think one of the opportunities you have when you play a wild card is to pick not necessarily differentials for the sake of it, but good players in the game that not many people own. Ollie Watkins' ownership at the moment, right, is about 30%. So it's not the case that not many people own him, but I do think his ownership amongst engaged managers is still pretty low, which if you're watching this video, I'd probably suggest you're an engaged manager and your competition around you for where you want to finish this season. I don't think many of them are going to have Ollie Watkins. And I know he's not gotten off to the best start this season yet, but I do still think he's got a lot of potential for goals and points. He is a proven Premier League goal scorer over multiple seasons, right? He's missed a few big chances so far this season, but he's kind of the striker that does that. Sometimes he just does go through a run of missing chances, but when he gets his confidence back on and firing, it'll be really good. And I think Everton, Wolves, Ipswich, 3 really good fixtures coming up. That's the perfect opportunity for him to get that. I really like this draft, and so does Fantasy Football Hub. So it might have similar expected points to other drafts that you've seen, but because of its future potential, the AI rating goes up. It actually gets a 97% AI rating according to Fantasy Football Hub. Like I said, there's a link in the description. You can build your own wildcard drafts, get your AI ratings, 50% off Fantasy Football Hub in the description below. But yeah, of all the drafts I've put together and seen so far, I think this one is probably my favourite. All right, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, I already have made a wildcard draft video this week, but it's gone down really well. Lots of questions, lots of people suggesting changes to the draft that I made there. So I thought, well, why not, rather than just try and make one perfect draft, because I don't think there is one, why not make 4? And then people could decide for themselves which ones they like the look of. So let me know in the comments which one of those drafts is your favorite. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like rating, and you can subscribe. If you want to see more content from me, I'll be doing more FPL content during the international break. You can subscribe to the Goal to Goal channel. Should be just there on your screen. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in my next video.